I've never done a schedule before today, so I didn't know I had to press go live. I was looking at the chat and I was talking to you guys, and I didn't know that's what it's supposed to be. Hopefully you guys see and hear me. If the audio level is fine, if there's any issues, just let me know in the chat. I'm following the chat. It is just me, so it's going to be a little hectic on the first day. But if you guys enjoy it, we'll do it more often. But yeah, we can start off. Where are you guys from? Where is everyone joining in from? By the names, I could say mostly US, I think, just looking at the names in the chat. Okay, perfect. It's good now. I'm getting confirmation. Okay, we got some people joining in. Oh, wow, we got 400 people joining in. If you're just joining in for the first time, just hit the like and subscribe button. We got a subscriber counter right there on the screen. I'm from Houston, Florida, US. Okay, so I think there's a little bit of a delay, but I got a lot of big news. One of the biggest news we have is from Wall Street Journal, and they're reporting that China has stopped reporting a lot of data. Now, one thing we've been covering on this channel for a long time is China doesn't report their youth unemployment since 2023, if I'm being correct. Last time they reported their youth unemployment, it was at 23% or 21%. And since then, it's likely have gone up. We don't know the data because CCP doesn't report. Then, of course, we also have to remember that any data CCP does report is usually massaged to make CCP look good. And that's exactly why they stopped publishing the youth unemployment, because 21% is pretty bad for a communist party, I would say. All right, we got people from Louisiana. Oh, I'm cutting out. Is that true? Is that the problem for everyone, or is the voice good? We got people from Houston, Los Angeles. Perfect. Let's go. We got a lot of people. And by the way, if you guys are not subscribed, be sure to hit the subscribe button. We got a live counter right there. Maybe we can hit 50,000 today. We are at 47,000, so we'll get that going. But oh yeah, the first news is China pausing a lot of data that they're just not publishing that they used to publish. This includes land sale, foreign investment, which has been dropping like crazy since the tariffs have gone in effect. And the main reason being is people want to get their money out of China if they cannot, profit from China, basically. If they cannot produce stuff in China, they would rather just leave. But CCP is making it really hard for people to leave China. So everyone who has invested in factories, everyone who has invested in land or anything like that in China, well, CCP is not like US, or China is not like US, where you can just sell your US dollars and convert to any currency. In fact, there's a limit. I think even for billionaires in China, the limit is like $8,000 they can convert every single day. So that means if you're a very rich person, you're having a very hard time getting your money out of China. And that's for the simple reason CCP does not want the Chinese currency crashing or going up like crazy, because they want to maintain like a steady level of the currency, because that helps their export sector. So Chinese currency is not at market rate at all. The Chinese federal government is managing it. But let's listen to this segment by Gordon Chang, who talks about why China is pausing publishing all this.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that China has stopped.
Oh, is the sound actually messing up? Let me check. Oh, wow, I actually have no clue. I'll get someone who knows. I know I look Indian, but I'm not very good at tech. So I'll get someone to look at the sound after today. Outside of that, like on my side, it's showing everything great. Oh, wow, we got 1,200 people live. By the way, if there's anyone who isn't subscribed, be sure to hit the subscribe button. You can see that live counter right above my head. And we just want that counter to keep going up. Yeah, we got 600 people watching and only 72 likes. Exactly, Deborah. Let me pin this message. If you haven't liked the stream, be sure to hit the like button. It just gets more people watching. But the first news we are covering, if you're just joining in, is the Chinese economy is showing signs of cracking. And again, we won't have the accurate data from CCP. That's something we already know. But everyone outside who follows China, they usually adjust their analysis based on the number they publish, right? The way we do it is like CCP publishes a GDP growth figure every year. We all know it's not accurate. In fact, even the CCP premier has publicly said to the US president that it's not accurate. CCP knows it's not accurate. So even CCP adjusts that data whenever they report it, so they know the correct data. So what foreign people have started doing is they look at the light pollution from China using satellite. If the light pollution goes up, maybe you can assume the GDP is growing. If it goes down, you can assume the GDP is going down. Again, it's not accurate. It's not going to give us the exact data of how much the GDP is going up or how much it's going down. But it gives us a rough sense, like it is directionally correct. If the light pollution is going up, it will give us a sense that GDP is going up. If it's going down, GDP is going down. Well, China has stopped reporting a lot of the figures that were used by foreign companies and foreign countries to get a sense of the Chinese economy. So let's watch this clip from Gordon Chang about that.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that China has stopped publishing hundreds of statistics, even official soy sauce production reports, making it harder to know what's actually going on with the economy there. Joining me now, Gatestone Institute senior fellow and author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, Gordon Chang. Gordon, good morning. And what is your reaction to this stop in data production by the CCP? I mean, not that we...
By the way, hopefully we have Gordon Chang someday on the stream here, because we want to try to do this daily. So if you guys enjoy it, just let us know in the chat. We'll try to do this daily. But hopefully Gordon Chang sees this and someday he comes on.
Could necessarily believe the data that we've been given for years. Fair enough. I've said that multiple times. But this seems to be a new level.
Yes, this certainly is. And it's been going on now for a couple of years because the Chinese technocrats understand that we use underlying data to draw questions about their headline gross domestic product numbers. So, for instance, we're seeing a lot of evidence that suggests that their 5.4% report of growth in Q1 can't be true. And now...
Oh, by the way, yeah, talking about this, two things I want to point out. They published the Q1 growth, and that was before Trump put all the tariffs on China, right? And they said their economy grew 5.4, and they were aiming to grow at 5.1. So China beat the expectations. But they just make up numbers. So everyone looks at like the supporting numbers, right? So they looked at like, okay, is the Chinese tax revenue growing? Well, that's not growing, that's going down. So that doesn't really support the GDP going up. The second thing is a lot of Chinese media, they love looking at US electricity consumption. And whenever US publishes the GDP data here in the United States, they say, hey, US is not consuming more electricity, so they're lying about the GDP, right? When in reality, the US economy is not built like Chinese economy. It's not as factory heavy. So using electric consumption to just the GDP is probably not the best way to do it. But again, that's what they use, right? Well, this year, they're not talking about the electric consumption in China because if we look at electric consumption in China, it's going down, all the while CCP is saying that the GDP is going up. So even by their own logic, the Chinese media knows that the CCP is lying, but of course they cannot report it because the media there is controlled by the CCP. So they say what CCP wants them to say. But let's continue. For everyone who's saying the audio keeps cutting out, a lot of people said in the chat that if you just refresh it, it will be fixed. Hopefully it's not unwatchable, but again, I'll study the stream right after I end it, and then I'll make sure it's fixed for tomorrow. So I don't know too much about tech, so I'll have someone else help me out after today.
As President Trump said, the Chinese economy is contracting. We saw that from the price data for March and February. We also saw it in the PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index for April, which clearly showed factory activity on the downswing. So yes, the Chinese regime does not want us to know what's going on, and they're going to continue to restrict information to us.
But at the same time, they're trying to solidify relationships around.
See, this is also why a lot of people say, oh, China wants to replace the dollar. That will just never happen because we have to think about how a lot of the data collection and data reporting works in the US, right? In the US, we have departments that are independent of the government and they measure GDP data. They measure a bunch of stuff. Like Fed measures the inflation and they're independent, which again, I think Trump may not be happy about it, but it's a very good thing for US markets because they don't play politics. They don't get involved. They do their stuff independently and they just measure it. In China, it's not independent. It's like China can stop publishing any data whenever they want. That's not a good news for markets and investors. So one of the big reasons why dollar is the reserve currency is because the Fed is independent. A lot of the agencies are independent over here that manage the economy and measure the economy statistics. In China, it's not like that. So people just don't trust their currency. So there is no world that the Chinese currency is going to replace the US dollar as the reserve currency. If anything, there's a very low chance, but if US does lose its reserve status, it's going to be like a basket of currencies that people will start using, or maybe gold, but no one's going to the Chinese currency or even the Russian currency. And there's never going to be a BRICS currency because India has publicly said multiple times they don't want a BRICS currency because India doesn't trust China. China wouldn't want someone else controlling the currency, because if it's not dollar, why would China have someone else control it? But anyways, let's continue with this.
Around the world at the exclusion of the United States. I mean, look at Russia and China, Iran and China, their moves in Africa, especially in Western Africa, Gordon. So the Chinese seem to be taking another tack. That, they may be closed off to the American market, but they're trying to strengthen their relationships. I mean, even Chevron CEO Mike Wirth, who joined Maria on SMF yesterday, he warned that China could hold more influence on Venezuela if the Trump administration terminates a Biden-era grant that would allow Chevron to export Venezuelan oil to the U.S. Watch what he told her. I want to get your response to this.
A good portion of Venezuelan oil has historically come to the United States. Refineries on the Gulf Coast are designed to run that specific type of oil, and so it's very important for energy security in the U.S. The changes in the rules mean that that oil won't flow to the U.S. now, so making us less secure. China is actually the largest buyer of Venezuelan oil today. Venezuelan government officials have been in China very recently, encouraging China to buy more. And so as the largest buyer today, the policies could drive even more of that trade to China.
And this is sort of China's MO, become a country's biggest creditor and ultimately dominate. And I don't think the U.S. or the Trump administration.
Well, this is also, China is, I think, one of the biggest importer of Venezuelan oil, after the United States. I don't know the exact figure, but we're going to pause using the Venezuelan oil. But Trump has slapped on a 25% tariff on any country that buys Venezuelan oil. Now, I don't know when he'll enforce this, but China is continually buying Venezuelan oil. So if we want to enforce that, that's another 25% on top of the 145 we already got. And on top of that, just 3 days ago, I think Trump announced a 100% tariff on anyone who buys Iranian oil. And 90% of Iranian oil goes to China. So that's going to be insane if he does decide to enforce that. Again, we don't know when he will.
Wants to see China dominating another country.
Well, you're right. We've seen that.
Oh, wow. We got 3,000 people, so that's definitely insane. If you haven't hit the like button, be sure to hit the like button. It just lets us know if you're enjoying the stream or not. Secondly, if you're having audio issues, just refresh your stream, because at the beginning, we had some issues, but it should be better now. And there's a subscribe counter right above my head, so hit the subscribe button and then you'll see.
This playbook before in Africa, in Latin America, in Central Asia. And China has created a stronger presence, stronger influence, and control over economies and governments around the world through using their economic assets and position to do so.
Gordon, your reaction to that?
Well, everything that Mike Wirth says is true, but there's another aspect to that, and that is if Chevron leaves, as President Trump has ordered, then the Chinese and Russians will come in, but they'll come in on terms which are not as favorable as the terms that Venezuela had with Chevron. And that means the Venezuelan regime will be weakened. And that's an important thing. Let's remember that the Venezuelan opposition, the people who want democracy in that country, want Chevron out. And they understand the reason why, because Maduro will have less of a good time with this. Also, we've got to remember the context for this. All of that migration during the Biden era through our southern border, that wasn't organic. That was actually supported by the Venezuelan regime, which supported NGOs, which told us what they were doing. They were attacking our sovereignty. So Venezuela is an enemy, and we need to make sure that we don't strengthen our enemies. We can get oil from other places. We can drill on our own soil. We can buy from our friends. Let's not buy from our enemies.
Well, and I think that's the president.
Well, we actually do have a question from Mike Stewart, who donated $14, so thank you so much for that. Unsure of what CCP really is and what its influence in your country means? Invest an hour of your time to watch Frank Dictor lecture. Well, I don't know who that is, but we'll definitely watch it. If it's interesting, we'll make a video. Your children and grandchildren's freedom will thank you. Now, yes, CCP is definitely, one of the craziest thing is if you look back, what happened, like the world depending on CCP's supply chain, China's supply chain, is not by accident. It's not because the Chinese manufacturing is so great. Of course, it is really good because they have had 20 years of practice, But in 2021, you can hear Xi Jinping publicly tell the Chinese people that they want the world more dependent on China's supply chain because it gives them leverage. We saw what happened in 2020, 2019 when the COVID stuff started. China started just, what is the word for it? They just started hoarding up supplies, the medical supplies and all that, when they found out about the virus, all the while they didn't tell the world what was waiting for them, like what was coming. And another crazy fact is when China discovered the virus in Wuhan, they paused all the domestic flights. So any flight between Wuhan and a Chinese city was paused, but the foreign flights were still allowed. So that means using those foreign flights, that's how the virus spreads so quickly to other countries.
President Trump's point, and it has been for years, drill, baby, drill. You know, we've got the capacity to generate energy here in the United States on our land. Let's do it. I've got Liz Peek on set. She's got a question for you.
Gordon, good morning. There was apparently news coverage in China a week ago or so about factories closing in the South, people being laid off, which I was surprised about because there is such a hold on information flow, and I don't think that's what Xi Jinping wants Chinese people to be watching. What's your take on that? Is he beginning to get pushback for his one-man controlled economy, which is doing so poorly now?
Yes, well, he is. Well, first of all, there are factory closures. China can't sell to the global South or to anybody else the products that it would otherwise have.
Well, America doesn't have wrong oil. It's just our refineries don't refine the oils that we produce here in America. And that's because a lot of the refineries are old, back in the day when we got the oil from the Middle East. So they are built to refine the oil that's like a lot more thicker. It has a different viscosity, and that's what American refineries do. And our oil just goes to foreign refineries who have the capability to just refine their oil. So it's a pretty even trade. But let's say the good part is we now produce more oil than we use every single day, like on a daily basis. So if there is a problem where we cannot get foreign oil into our country, we could have our refineries just, it will take a lot of investment, but we can refine our own oil. Right now, if you have the opportunity to just send it somewhere else and buy the oil that's cheaper to refine here, that's what's happening. But you know, the country that's the biggest importer of oil in the country, in the world, is China, and they don't produce nearly as much as they need. And that's why I think almost 80% of Chinese oil comes from the Middle East, which goes to the Malacca Strait and all that. And that's a very important choke point that can become very important if China ever attacks Taiwan.
Sold to the U.S. because Trump's tariffs at their current rates keep many Chinese products out of our country. And that means these export-oriented factories, especially those in the southern portion of the country, they have been closing. They've been in trouble for a couple of years now, and they certainly are at a point where they can't continue. This is some.
How do we know? So the reason China is losing the trade war, the reason you can infer it, is because they just stopped publishing data that tells us anything about their economy. And it just happened today. They just announced that, hey, we're not going to be publishing any data. And on top of that, you know, when President Trump put 125% tariff on Chinese goods, China retaliated with their own 125%. But this is where we have to look at the numbers, right? US imports roughly $460 billion worth of goods from China. So let's just round it up, 500 billion, while we export roughly 150 billion to China. So our tariffs are a lot more, like hitting Chinese economy a lot more harder than their tariffs are hitting our economy. But on top of that, China slowly took off the tariffs without making any announcement to the Chinese people or to the foreign media on roughly one-third of the product that we export to China. So roughly $40 billion worth of the product, China is not charging tariffs. And the reason is simple. China needs those products. A lot of those products are airline related, so China needs the maintenance products, like the products to keep up their airplanes so they can keep flying. Otherwise, they will just start falling out of the sky like it's happening in Russia. And semiconductor that China is very dependent on, of course, China needs it. And I think another thing they took off the tariff from is ethanol, and that's something that they need to produce plastic. Since China is the manufacturing factory of the world, they need to produce a lot of plastic, I'm guessing, and that's why they took off the tariff. But what's interesting here is they didn't make any announcement because they didn't want the Chinese citizens thinking that the CCP is bending the knee. CCP is, you know, giving into the U.S. demands because they want to seem like the strong man, and they're pushing this narrative in China where U.S. is the enemy, U.S. is the one who started this trade war, when in reality, China has been working towards this unfair trade practice for years. In 2018, we had a trade deal with China, but they never fulfilled it. So how could they blame U.S. for killing the world trade when China agrees to a trade deal but doesn't fulfill its terms?
something that is weakening Xi Jinping's hold on power. Remember, he's got near total accountability because he's taken power from everybody else.
By the way, this is my one of the first streams, so I don't know how to manage the chat and do this, so that's why I'm not as active with interacting with the chat.
And that means he's being blamed for the tariff war, as the Chinese call it. And that means his grip, I think, is now weakening. He's not the all-powerful leader that he was pre-COVID.
Along with those nagging questions, Gordon, about his health, which has been brought up repeatedly. And again, because this is China, can't get a clear answer on that as well.
Well, also, he recently removed the second in command at PLA. So definitely things are not as safe for Xi Jinping as they once were in China. But we'll go to the second news in just a second. I did want to show you guys how some of the factories in China are shutting down. This is from Inconvenient Truth, none other than one of the premier reporter for the CCP practices. Let's just. Oh wow, let's check the subscriber number. Someone just said that. Oh yeah, we're almost at 800. Let's see if we can get to 48,000. 1.6 mil, 48,000. And yeah, we are not AI. I know a lot of people comment that we are AI. That's because, as you guys can see, we don't have the face for. We have a face for radio, and that's why a lot of our videos are just voice only and B-roll. And recently, we did make a big mistake where one of the B-roll was horribly wrong. We showed accidentally a B-roll from South Korea while talking about China. Definitely big mistake, and yeah, that was our mistake. That was more specifically my mistake, and we'll make sure that doesn't happen in the future. Chats. Oh yeah, we definitely need bots. Definitely need mods. So yeah, we'll get some. We want to do these every day, so we'll slowly get more. But let's look at this report from Jennifer Zhang. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing that correctly. The situation in Shenzhen, which is considered the Silicon Valley of China. So it's definitely one of the more premier locations where people are usually earning a lot more compared to let's say other Chinese cities. And a massive shopping mall spanning 1 million square meters. That's how much? 10 million square feet? Holy shit, that's big. And it's completely empty. This video was filmed before the US-China trade war began. At one mark, the video includes the footage of the mall from 10 years ago, steaming with crowds. The contrast is striking. Under such conditions, how much longer can the Chinese economy hold up in the US-China trade war? Let's look at this video.
这里300-400万没了，这里大一点起码700-800万没了，这里还有这里整一个厂子几千万全部打水漂，现在空无一人，连过街的老鼠都没有一个。这里就是当年那些深圳有钱人挤破脑袋都要抢的发财铺，现如今成为别人口中最大的笑话、最大的败笔、最大的痛啊！你看。
Yeah, so with the India point, this is where I have a little bit of a controversial opinion on India. We don't want to create India into next China, even though my parents are actually Indian. But look what happened with China, where again, India is a democracy, so it's a little bit different. But I don't think we want to be as dependent on another country as we got on China again. So we don't want to just replace China with India, where 20 years in the future we are competing with India, because India is an ally of US, but it's not as close of an ally as we would like them to be. They're still very close to Russia, and they're still very close to Iran. So it's definitely good to move a lot of our manufacturing into India, but we don't want to have all the manufacturing just going to India. Preferably, we want to use Vietnam, we want to use India, we want to use Cambodia, we want to use Latin American countries. So we spread it out, so everyone's benefiting equally, and no one's benefiting so much that they can start competing with the US economy. Yeah, exactly. Someone just said we have to diversify. We don't want to get dependent on one country again, because you never know what future holds. Right? In 20 years from now, we don't know where India is going to head. We don't know where US is going to head. So it's better to not be dependent on just one country. Yeah, I know India's relationship, even China's relationship with Canada is very, it's unique. I think interesting. I don't know as much about it to talk about it publicly, but definitely India, Canada, and India-China relationship is different. And I actually have a very different thinking about Carney too, because he's a lot more business person than any other world leader. I guess Trump is a business person too. So I don't think Carney will be as bad for Canada as people make it out to be. Again, still for the same government that has not grown the Canadian economy for almost 10 years, I think. But yeah, I don't know as much about the Canadian politics to talk too freely about it. No, again, I don't mean to say the Indians are not good people. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying like we don't want to be too dependent on just one country like we got on China. Well, that's the thing. We cannot just completely move all the manufacturing back to U.S. Because think about it, there's a lot of low-value manufacturing that the U.S. will never take on. Like U.S. workers wouldn't want to do it because there's not enough margins to pay the workers a living wage over here, right? And on top of that, a lot of people bring up this argument that hey, we can do robots and they will do all the work, so we can still bring everything back here. But you still need some people to manage the robots, right? And that's where the other countries still have an advantage because labor in developing countries is a lot cheaper than labor here. So even if everything is robots, every other country can use the robots too, and they would whatever people you need to manage it all would be cheaper in other countries than here. All right, let's finish this.
一眼看过去，鬼影都没有一个。1楼、2楼、3楼、4楼、5楼、6楼。
Is the escalator moving? If it's empty, I don't understand why they would keep it on.
全部都废了，兄弟们。当年这里就是号称要打造整个华南地区最大的一个商业城，涵盖所有的一个时。
Yeah, exactly. Also, pollution is one of the big reasons why we moved all the rare earth refining to foreign countries, right? A lot of the Western countries, not just US, even Europe, they just didn't, it's a very dirty process to refine rare earths. And the good part about rare earths is they're not really rare. Like if I go to my backyard and dig up dirt, it probably has some rare earth, but it's just like, it produces a lot of toxic material and toxic water when you refine it. So where do you put all that toxic water? You have to put it somewhere, and there's a lot of regulation on how to take care of that toxic material. And to do that, it's very expensive. And that's why all the companies here just stopped doing it. And China has like a 90% hold on the market now. They produce, I think, 60% of the rare earths, but they refine 90%. So everyone just takes up their rare earths and sends it to China. And this is something they've been using as leverage. It's one of the few leverage they have. But luckily, we recently just signed a deal with Ukraine. So hopefully, over here, we have a lot of Ukrainian supporters because, after all, Ukraine's under an invasion. But we signed a minerals deal, so that should help us a lot, especially when the war stops in Ukraine. I think a lot of the refining factories will be set up there. And on top of that, we can use like other developing countries to set up more refining factories. So as the demand for rare earths goes up and up, countries will look at that and be like, hey, we want to do it. You know, even if that means taking a little bit of a hit in their pollution, if they can earn money for their citizens, they would want to do it, and that means the Chinese hold on the refining of rare earths will loosen as the time passes.
商业，现如今你能看到的一个情况就是。
Yep. If you're just joining in, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. As you guys can see, we're just 90 subs away from 48,000, 1.6 million, 48,000 subscribers. So be sure to hit that subscribe button. It's right above my head if you see the sub counter.
深圳赤裸裸的一个惨状，你们知道这里有多大吗？超100万平方，相当于1。
No, again, I understand people who operate robots are highly paid and they're highly skilled. But again, we cannot argue that it's only US who has highly skilled workers, right? Other people in the foreign countries have it. And the smartest people, let's say, you can hire the smartest person from a college in China for 300 grand, which is a lot of money, right? Especially in China, 300 grand a year. But to hire the smartest people graduating college here in the United States, you need $10 million. So just for the competition of the smartest people, even if, let's say, everything is produced by the robots and we just have like a small group of people managing the robots, it's still cheaper to do it overseas, especially when it comes to low-value manufacturing, right? High-value stuff, we definitely want to bring it back to the United States, but the low-value stuff is unlikely it's going to come to the US. It's very likely that it's going to go to the countries that are allies with the US, that are not China, that are not looking to, basically destroy US.
1000多亩地啊，几万名业主买了这里，现在都变成了利诱的韭菜。10年前的这里啊，是非常热闹的，人山人海。
Oh, wow, look at how busy this was just 10 years ago. Also, this was 10 years ago, would be what, 2015? Yeah, so the economy was pretty good back then.
人山人海。现如今你们看到的这些招牌，都是10年前就已经挂在这里的了。现如今。
Well, Russia is very unhappy about the Ukraine deal because they don't want US getting close to Ukraine.
商家都已经倒闭跑路完了啦，整个厂是空无一人。你们知道这里是哪里吗？知道的评论区打出来。像这种商业综合体的部位啊，一旦分割出去给个人业主之后，几乎是不可能再运营了起来的啦，因为它没有这种独立生存的能力。
Do you guys hear my fan? Is it too loud? Like if I'm not playing anything, is that too loud? Hopefully not, because I don't hear it with the headphones.
你看看，像10年前很火的那种商业综合体，有几个还能再运营的？是不是都哑火了？像这种部位啊，兄弟们不用看了，没得救了，我们都废了。所以你们还想
Yeah, India is definitely a lot closer than a lot of countries, but they're not full-on allies. Like they're still very close to Russia. So yeah, they definitely have trade disputes with China, but they are close with Russia and Iran. And again, I like India. We should move stuff to India, but I'm just saying we don't want to make the mistake where thinking like, oh, 20 years from now, India is never going to be competing with us, you know?
买铺的话呢，一定要擦亮你们的眼睛呐！像深圳80%的铺位都是坑来的。
80% of the shops. So another thing I did want to talk about, this was 2 days ago. The Chinese exporters are washed products in the third country, and this is something similar to like the transshipments. Basically, they take the product to a different country and then they relabel it. So let's say they take it to South Korea, they put it in a warehouse. They're not really doing anything to the product. The product is in its final form, but if you ship a product from China to US, you're paying 145% tariff, right? But if you ship the same product to China to South Korea, and then South Korea to US, it's only 10% tariff, and hopefully that 10% plus whatever the cost of shipping to China to US is cheaper than the 145%, you're technically making a profit. And they're doing this a lot. Like if you go to a Chinese social media now, you can see people like influencers just advertising saying, hey, if you're a factory owner, we'll help you avoid illegally the US tariffs. And this is where US does need to, you know, crack down on it, because think about it. Let's just don't think about like CCP or anything. If you're a factory owner and what the two choices you have is either you go bankrupt or you do something illegal. I think a lot more people are going to do something illegal, which is like doing this transshipment shit where they move their product to a different country and then they move it to the US. And this is illegal, by the way, in the international law. And Vietnam just came out with like very strict rules or laws relating to transshipment. It's a criminal activity in Vietnam now. So if you're caught doing this, it's a crime. You could face 20 years in prison, and you can face, I think, 3 times the product that you're trying to ship. So if you're trying to ship $1 million worth of product, the fine is $3 million. So countries are cracking down on this, and this is why it kind of makes sense that Trump put tariffs on every single country. Again, I don't think that was a good idea, but in a sense, it turned out to be a good idea that now we can negotiate with every country and put pressure on them to say, hey, if you help the Chinese avoid our tariffs, we'll put more tariffs on you. That means your factories and your citizens will suffer because you're helping the Chinese. And at that point, everyone's gonna put their self-interest over any other country. Like US wants to put their citizens before like any other country's citizens. And same with China. China wants to put their citizens. So if there's a third country, let's say Vietnam, who has been helping China just avoid US tariffs for the last, I guess, 4 or 5 years, they're not gonna do it anymore, because if they get caught doing that, their citizens will face problems in the future. And now we had Scott Bessent. He's the Secretary of Treasury, and he's the main guy negotiating with all the countries, and he's likely going to be the main guy negotiating with China. And the negotiations are probably still ongoing, because even though China says there are no negotiations, President Trump says the meetings are ongoing. And on top of that, we have seen high-level Chinese people, like economic officials, entering the Treasury building in the US. And we have pictures of it, which we have covered on the channel. I don't have it right now, but I think we'll link the video later. But that just shows that the negotiations are going on. It's just not at the highest level. Like, it's not President Trump calling Chinese President Xi. It's like lower-level people are negotiating, and when there's some resemblance of a deal happening, I think that's when the high-level people will get involved. So one of the person who's doing the negotiations right now is Scott Bessent. So let's see what he's saying about China.
As I've said many times, that obviously in this trade puzzle, China's the biggest piece. Getting better terms of trade is not always a
people saying that China has already found customers in Russia, Middle East, and Latin America, it's just not possible. Like, if you go look up in Russia, 30% of people don't have toilet. They don't have plumbing inside. They don't earn anywhere close to what the US middle class earns. There's a famous saying in China, and that is the best customer in the world is the US middle class, because we love spending. So it's going to be very hard for countries to replace the US market. And that's exactly why we have a lot more leverage than people are making it out to be. It's not one country versus one country. We spend almost how much? I think $7-8 trillion a year. So it's like a lot of money versus other countries who have very little money.
A straight line, it's not always a pleasant process, but I think at the end, the trading relationships will be stronger.
Welcome back to the second hour of Angeles. And of course, joining us for the entire hour, Bullseye American Ingenuity Fund Portfolio Manager, Adam Johnson. Great to have you.
Great to be here.
So China feeling the crunch over tariffs, and President Trump is not budging.
We hit 48,000 subscribers. Thank you so much. Perfect. If you haven't hit the like button, be sure to hit the like button. It just helps us with the algorithm and helps us against any bots who are disliking the video.
The deal is on full display.
Would you consider dropping the tariffs to get China to the negotiating table?
No, China's getting killed right now. They're getting absolutely destroyed. Their factories are closing. Their unemployment is going through the roof. I'm not looking to do that to China. Now, at the same time, I'm not looking to have China make hundreds.
Wait, this is where it's funny because President Trump says he wants to negotiate. I don't know. We should turn off. I mean, I don't have anyone working the chat right now, so we have subscribers only because I think that's the default. But I'll change it for tomorrow. But President Trump's saying publicly that he wants to negotiate, but some of the actions don't seem like the U.S. really wants to negotiate. Like they really want to move forward with the tariffs for a long time. Because all the while he's saying this, CIA just released 2 videos looking for Chinese dissidents, basically Chinese CCP officials. If anyone wants to switch sides and play double agent for U.S. or play the spy for U.S., we're publicly broadcasting these videos. And the CIA is saying that they're already working. And I don't know if this is just mind games where CIA is just trying to freak out Xi Jinping and the CCP officials who are like loyal to the CCP party. But we'll get to that news in just a second.
Of billions of dollars and build more ships and more army tanks and more airplanes.
As he mentioned, Chinese exporters are trying to find ways, though, around the tariffs, with some shipping their goods through third-party countries. There are reports, though, that Beijing is working on a list of American products to exempt from its own 125% retaliatory tariffs. Those are including pharmaceuticals, microchips, and aircraft.
The funniest part of Xi Jinping banning Boeing planes to China, like Chinese airlines are not allowed to buy Boeing planes for some reason, that the Chinese presidential plane, the Chinese Air Force One, is a Boeing plane. It's a Boeing 787. So all the while he's flying around meeting other countries' leaders in a Boeing plane, he's telling the Chinese citizens that, hey, you cannot use a Boeing plane.
Engines. Adam, I want to come to you. This is sort of the game of chicken. Who needs who more?
Yeah.
Do you believe the data that China right now needs us a little bit more from what we're seeing that Trump said about the factories, about the exports that are starting to fall?
Well, in theory, the short answer to your question is yes. I do think China needs us more, and I'll tell you why. Because we are consumers, so we get their products and they're cheaper.
Well, someone just said, how does the market of U.S. that is only 50% of their entire market matters? Well, first of all, it's not 15%. The 15% is just a direct trade between China and U.S., right? That's what it gets measured. But we also have to think about the indirect trade that they're doing, because a lot of the Chinese shipment goes to Vietnam, Cambodia, South Korea, and I'm forgetting a country. But a lot of, Mexico, of course, they go there and then they come into the U.S. And also a lot of the trade that happens through Temu and Shein, who used to use this Diminimus provision where they would just ship packages under $800 or under $600 into U.S. So a lot of that stuff doesn't count in that 15%. So a good estimate would be like the Chinese trade with U.S. is anywhere from 25 to 30%. And that's a very big amount. You cannot just lose 30% of your trading capacity and be fine economically, especially considering China already has the real estate problems, China has the bank debts that are going bad, China's local governments have too much debt, and like they already had a lot of issues, and now this is like the tariff war is literally turning into something huge.
cheaper, fine. But they are trying to employ their people. They're trying to run their factories. And if people aren't buying their stuff, then all of a sudden, all those subsequent relationships start to break down. So yes, I think you're right that China does need us more than we need them. But the fact is, we all kind of need each other. Just how badly we were treated. And specifically, here are the numbers. For the past 10 years, on average, we have put a 2.7% tariff on goods coming into this country. But when our goods go overseas, they face a 6.7% tariff. So in other words, the rest of the world, on average, has been tariffing us at 2.5 times the rate we have been tariffing them. That's not fair. That needs to end, and that's why this whole thing is happening. And I think if the White House had presented it that way, it would have been a lot easier to understand. So I'm not sure I entirely agree with the way we've gone about this, but I also agree with Secretary Bessent that this is a negotiation and that we are getting there, and that the end result will ultimately be very productive and good for the U.S.
Madison Scott Bessent has also said many times that we import 5 times what China imports.
So yeah, this is something, how someone just said 15%? If you look at the official figures, like I said, China exports around 450 mil, and we export to China around 150 mil. That's only 3 times. But the US administration has been very public about using the 5-time figure because they're factoring in all the indirect trade that China does with the US. So they know China is a lot more dependent on US than the public official figures show. And that's why they're openly saying, hey, we know you need us more than we need you.
From us. So effectively, if you cool down our imports or their exports, they get hit harder. I've sort of taken a stance on this show that, Lydia, and you alluded to this earlier. This trade war has made me rethink my addiction to cheap crap. I do not need 30 sweaters that are $2 made by slave labor in China when I could have one really good quality American-made item. Are Americans around the world starting to think about the way we consume and the amount of what we consume?
I think so, and I think you see that in some of...
Yeah, exactly. The pharmaceutical stuff is so important. Like, we cannot be dependent on other countries for our medicines. Especially, like, let's say if China does invade Taiwan and we are going in to defend, that's a pretty adversarial position. And then we cannot have all this critical stuff getting from the Chinese market because we know China will use them as leverage.
Of our consumer data and just in terms of where people are spending their money and how much they're spending. The thing that worries me is more so the small businesses that acquire the goods from China and then sell them, because we like to, it's 99% of the businesses in America are small businesses. They rely on a lot of Chinese goods. So yes, I think we could benefit from having a different approach to consumerism, which China does not want to see, because they are fully, as Adam was saying, fully reliant on our consumerism. Estimates put it at like 20% of exports go to the US market. And honestly, I think it's higher than that. And we're already seeing reports out of China that factories are shuttering hours, they're laying off staff. So they're already feeling the impacts before we've even seen tariffs really go into full effect. You're hearing President Xi say things like, we need to remember the bottom line. When you hear that rhetoric out of China, that spells problems, because he needs to be strong for his country and the people there, but it shows that there's going to be tumultuous times ahead. They've already really entered it. So yeah, I think America...
Yeah, this is also what's so funny is a lot of Chinese officials, the CCP officials, are telling the common citizens, hey, we can eat grass for 3 years just to beat the US. All the while, Xi Jinping is a billionaire. All the top officials are worth so much money because most of the most profitable companies in China are not on the public stock market. They are state-owned. So CCP is basically using them as their private businesses. They are owned by CCP officials. So it's crazy that CCP is telling the normal people, hey, you can suffer, it'll be fine. All the while they're worth hundreds of millions of dollars off of the state-owned companies that are supposed to be for the normal people. Isn't that like the whole argument for communism? It's like we used all these companies' profit to funnel it back into people's, make people's life better. By the way, we did get a $10 donation from Sledgehammer. They will only start a war at the sea where we have our trading countries, because that's the only exit now with all the people. They're starving or they will lose total power. Yeah, that's a very common strategy that many dictators use, is when they see turmoil domestically, they want to create a foreign enemy so they can unite the citizens in their country against a foreign enemy. And that's what Putin did, attacking Ukraine. He has done that every few years because it's easier to just create a foreign enemy. And that's what China might do with invading Taiwan, and then they can create the foreign enemy out of Taiwan, US, Japan. Whoever basically comes to the defense of Taiwan, China will say, oh, they're trying to take territory from the Chinese people, and they'll create a foreign enemy. That means it's easier to stomach for the public the suffering they're going through. They can frame it as like, oh, fighting for the survival of the Chinese nation. And also CCP has this habit of using this figure where it's like China has survived for 5,000 years and they'll survive this trade war. They say this slogan a lot, especially on the domestic social media, like in the Chinese social media. But in reality, CCP just celebrated their 75th anniversary. So why are they using the 5,000 year figure when they themselves just celebrated the 75th anniversary? Doesn't make sense.
American consumers are starting to realize, maybe I don't want this, and I hope that it really shines a light on the labor practices, because our reliance on cheap goods has come on the backs of arguably slave labor. That should be something that any American is not okay with. But I do think in the short term, we're going to see small businesses impacted by that because we are so reliant, even as middlemen, on those goods.
And Lydia, the cheap goods that we talk about, and I'll call them goods, I won't call them crap. You speak in hyperbole to make my point, Lydia. The de minimis rule, which is goods under $800 originally had been exempt, and you had companies since that's been...
Oh, that's also such an insane fact, because let's look up how much Temu and Shein are making. Let me pull up ChatGPT. It's quicker that way. Because Temu just stopped advertising completely on Facebook, Google, everywhere, and they stopped shipping stuff from China to US. So it's truly insane. What's their total revenue? That's what I'm looking up. Oh, wow, in 2024, they made $30 billion. How much did the Shein make? So anyway, it's pulling up my ChatGPT. Oh, so total Temu and Shein made $80 billion in 2024, and now that trade is basically disappearing. And that's a big amount that doesn't get accounted in the 15% that we talked about, the trade between China and US. We only say, oh, China only exports 15% of their products to US. But Temu and Shein is not accounted in there because they use this, you know, like the small package provision, the Diminimus provision to get their products in, so it doesn't count towards the trade. But $80 billion is still a big amount. So official trade number is $460 billion. Add another 80 to it, you can see like that's almost 20% right there that people forget that that's not there anymore. They have basically stopped shipping product to US. They're still selling product in US, but they're only selling the products that are already in their US warehouses. So you can still go on Temu and buy something, but a lot of the products that were coming directly from China are just not coming anymore.
Reverse. I mean, Amazon's talking about it, Temu, Shein, they're talking about it because they benefit when you buy something under $800 and they don't pay a tax on that.
Yeah, you know, I think this is so fascinating because initially when there was talks about the closure of the de minimis loophole, this was announced months ago. You saw a lot of people that were really cheering for American manufacturing, saying this is going to be so great because American manufacturers are not competing on a level playing field with Chinese manufacturers because China is able to take advantage of this de minimis loophole, get their cheap crap, so to speak, over to the United States without paying a tariff. So let's close that. I think it's important to remember that this de minimis loophole has been in place for decades, and it's only been recently that we've seen companies like Shein and Temu really take advantage of it.
So it's not really a loophole. This is where, like, I guess it is a loophole, but when people use the word loophole, it's like, oh, it was a negative thing. Like, no, the de minimis thing was put in place because, let's say, if you and me travel to, let's say, Italy or anywhere you travel to, you bring back souvenirs. You don't want to pay a tariff on like gifts you're bringing for your family. And that's why we had that. That's why we have this provision that lets normal people bring back souvenirs on their trips, from their trips overseas, and you don't have to pay a tariff. But the companies in 2015, 2016, I think, companies like Temu, Shein, started using this provision to basically cheat the US tax system and sell their products for cheaper. That's why if you ever downloaded the Temu app and you go on there and you see a lot of their products are priced like very cheaply, like $5, $2, sometimes $20, $50. That's because the Diminimus provision was around $600. And so anything under $600 that comes in using that provision, it doesn't need to go through any checks. It doesn't need to go through any, like, it doesn't need to pay any tariffs. It doesn't need to declare anything. So they were using this provision to bring in a lot of cheap products and sell it in the United States. But the provision was meant for like normal people when they travel. And the second bad part about this provision, or I guess how everyone is exploiting it, is since a lot of the products under this provision weren't supposed to go through checks, they were using this to smuggle drugs into the United States.
I have some data. You know I like that, Brian. Between 2015 and 2024, the amount of products shipped with the de minimis loophole to the United States up by almost 900%. It really illustrates how these companies like Shein and Temu have been able to take advantage of this. So when you think about, is Trump going to lower tariffs to try to get China back to the negotiating table? Maybe he shouldn't, but maybe there are other opportunities.
But he wouldn't do it because, again, this is where we have to remember why Trump isn't lowering tariff to just start the negotiations, because that's the card China played the first time, right? They said they're not going to negotiate until Trump lowers the tariff. So Trump just increased the tariff, and then they came to the negotiating table. That's what they did first time in 2018. But the another thing they did first time that a lot of people don't talk about is China purposefully dragged out the negotiations. I think the tariff was introduced in 2018, and there wasn't a deal signed until late 2019 or early 2020. So basically, China's plan was, hey, we'll just wait out Trump, and then hopefully whoever comes next is easier on China. But unfortunately for China, Biden doubled down on Trump tariffs, so he didn't remove Trump tariffs. In fact, he introduced more tariffs on China, and now Trump is back. He's like triple downing on the tariffs, and it's going to continue because the China issue is pretty much a bipartisan issue, I think, here in the United States, which is kind of a good thing because if you follow U.S. politics, we don't really have any issues that both parties support.
Are ways to get to talk to China. Maybe it's the de minimis loophole. Keep the de minimis loophole closed for now. Use that as a negotiating tool because we know American consumers do like their cheap stuff. Maybe that's a way of kind of creating some leverage.
Brian, I come to you on data.
We have a $20 donation from Juani World. And what are the odds that China decides to attack Taiwan during all this turmoil? This seems like a prime opportunity for CCP to do so. But on the other hand, if they wait till 2027, there may be no more CCP. So the odds have definitely increased. So let's say whatever the odds were a few months ago, they have definitely increased. And we also see that happening with like the drills they're doing. And on top of that, a lot of the CCP military equipment is moving closer and closer to the south of China, so closer to Taiwan. But it's a good way to distract the domestic public. But again, we don't know exactly if they will actually do it or they'll wait till 2027. This is where we just have to keep following the intelligence report. And if we get any sign that Taiwan is about to be invaded, I think we can see a lot more military movement happening in the Southeast Asian countries. And on top of that, we kind of see this already, right? We just opened a new base in Japan, which we already have I think we have like 50 bases in Japan already, and we have the largest U.S. military presence in Japan outside of U.S. So out of any countries, we have the most amount of U.S. personnel in Japan. But we opened a base that's basically like a war base. So that base has a lot more freedom and like ability to decide stuff than any other base we have overseas. So that's a great news. And on top of that, we just moved a lot of equipment to Philippines. It was supposed to be for some war game drills, but I think it's staying there because U.S., at least the Trump administration, they really do believe that China is a bigger issue than Russia for U.S. right now. U.S. really wants Europe to deal with Russia, and U.S. will deal with China.
Pivoting a little bit.
Everybody's coming to me on data. I love this. I love data. Please bring data to me.
Resident economist.
Okay.
This is from the Wall Street Journal. Land sales measures, foreign investment data, unemployment indicators have gone dark in recent years in China.
Yeah, which is crazy. Unemployment they're hiding is insane because the youth unemployment, which we talked about at the beginning, was 21% in 2023. But just recently, I think the Shanghai University did a study of all their graduates, so all the students who are graduating. Only 55% of them got a job. So 45% of the university graduates were unemployed. And that kind of gives us a sense of why CCP is not publishing the youth unemployment data, is because they don't want to publish that number. But again, that doesn't mean that the actual countrywide youth unemployment is 45%, but it's definitely a lot higher than 21% that CCP published in 2023.
On cremations, business confidence index have been cut off. Even official soy sauce production reports are gone. In all, Chinese officials have stopped publishing hundreds of data points once used by investors and economists.
So someone asked, what's the healthcare like in China? This is where I think maybe tomorrow, because we will end it soon, but Serpenta, I think, is a really great China channel too, much like ourselves. And he did a great video because he's lived in China, I think, for almost a decade. So he knows a lot of hospitals and how they work. Now, what CCP has been doing, they've been pushing propaganda here in the US, because if you're losing the trade war, how can CCP turn this around? Well, if US just backs down. And how can they get US to back down is turn the public pressure, public attention away from China, or turn the public sentiment against the US government. So they've been pushing a lot of propaganda on TikTok, and one of the biggest propaganda that recently went viral was someone foreign. I don't think he was American. I think he was South African. He went to a Chinese hospital, and he said it cost him just $4 to get a whole checkup, and it was a walk-in appointment. So it wasn't an appointment that was pre-scheduled. He just walked in, $4, and boom. That's how great China is. That's how great the communism system is. Well, Serpenta did the whole breakdown of the video. He contacted the doctors in the hospital that this guy visited. And that hospital has a $4 fee just to set up an appointment. So clearly what he paid was more than $4. He likely paid a few $100s. So again, I would say still a lot less than US, but we have to realize Chinese people don't earn as much as the US counterparts, right? So the healthcare system is not much better in China. In fact, it's a lot harder, a lot more expensive for a lot of people. And the biggest downfall is cities have a lot of hospitals so people can go to, but almost 600 million people in China live in villages, and they don't have access to any hospitals. They don't have anything that they can go to. Almost 600 million people in China earn $5 and less. So imagine a hospital that charges you $4 just for an appointment, while almost half the country is earning $5 a day. That's definitely very expensive according to Chinese standards.
We basically have no idea what their economy is.
We have another donation from Mane Kalia. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. I think it's €5. Why is CCP more obsessed with Taiwan, but not those areas that it was forced to give to Russia in 1858 and 1860s? I think, and this is something we have covered on the channel, is so I don't think Russia and China are truly an ally. They are really, their interests is, I guess that's any country in geopolitics. There are no permanent friends, there are no permanent enemies, only permanent interests. Right now, they are very friendly, Russia and China, because they see US as the common enemy, they see Europe as a common enemy. But I think as soon as they feel like they cannot compete with Europe and US, they'll turn on each other. And Russia controls a lot of Chinese territory. I think in one of the major town of Vladivostok is a Chinese town that Russia still controls to this day. And Russia is kind of panicky about this because they still have soldiers protecting that town, because a lot of Chinese people call on the CCP to just attack Russia and take back the Chinese territory. But with Taiwan, I think CCP just uses that as a way to create a foreign enemy and just keep more of a support for themselves. Now, funniest part about Taiwan is CCP recently said that Taiwan should come back to the motherland, that's the mainland China, and the Taiwanese president responded to that by saying hey, no one should call PRC the motherland of Taiwan, because PRC, the People's Republic of China, that's the CCP, it's only 75 years old, while the ROC, the Republic of China, and that's Taiwan, that's 112 years old. So clearly, if there's anyone who should be considered the motherland, it's the Taiwanese people. Wow, this is so funny. Someone's saying Chinese youth employment rate fell to 17% in March 2025. I don't know how this guy knows this, because CCP doesn't publish the data. Maybe this guy has more access to the Chinese data than even the CCP.
Or is not doing. They go on to say that official GDP figures put out by China are 5% last year. They might be overstated by 2 to 3%.
Yeah.
Basically, from an investor, an economist point of view, you look and you actually are blind when you're trying to figure out what's going on there.
You know, and when they got rid of the soy sauce indicator, that was really a tough one. I didn't even know they had one of those.
They do.
One thing you know about a country is when they stop telling you how they're doing, they're not doing very well. I'll give you another country you can't get data out of, North Korea. Why does North Korea not publish any data? Because the data would be very bad, right? If China has abandoned.
China is following the oldest rule of statistic. If you don't measure a problem, you can assume the problem doesn't exist. I think the Chinese people would disagree with that, but that's what CCP is basically telling the world.
Hundreds of data points over the last several years that they used to publish, tell you how they're doing, and they don't do it anymore. Chinese communism has a fundamental problem. It doesn't work. And when the rest of the world starts to treat communists like they're communists, their data gets bad quick because the government's in charge. They're the ones allocating capital. And I can tell you, communists have never been good at allocating capital. So I think China's probably in a worse spot right now than people recognize. And when you have a communist leader saying we got to focus on the bottom line, a communist focusing on the bottom line, it's not your bottom line. It's not the good of the Chinese people. It's his own political standing. The one thing I think Trump knows is he has Xi on the ropes right now, which is why he said, I'm not going to lower tariffs to get him to the table. I might lower tariffs when he comes to the table, but he's got every reason in the world to come to the table right now.
Okay, but Adam, take the other side of that, because we've often argued on this program that the one thing China has is they think in centuries. And as an American, I think in my 3-month quarterly report or my 18-month midterm cycle. Xi doesn't face elections like Trump or like Republicans.
If attack does happen, how would this look on the U.S. economy with this addition of another war? So if China definitely attacks Taiwan, that's definitely going to be bad for U.S. economy. And the reason is simple. Look at how many companies are dependent on China, Apple being a big one. Now, Apple has announced they want to move out of China. How much is Apple worth today, by the way? Let me look it up. My bad. Apple market cap. It's almost worth $3 trillion, $2.97 trillion. And they're so dependent on China that they announced that they'll move out of China, but it will take them 18 months to move to India, right? And what is CCP doing with this? They just blocked Apple from moving equipment out of China. This is why depending on China is such a problem. And if an attack does happen today, that's going to be a big hit to the US economy, mainly because we have some of our biggest companies so heavily dependent on China. And that's why we want to decouple before an attack comes, because if attack does come, imagine Xi Jinping just saying, hey, if you want to receive all the medicines that your citizens need, you need to just give up Taiwan. You can't defend Taiwan. You can't support them in any way. Then would we have any other choice? It's going to be a very problematic and a hard decision for any politician who's in power to sell that to the U.S. public. So that's why we want to do this before there's any war. And yeah, who was that? Oh, thank you so much, Mane Kali, again. Oh, wait, I think I missed. Oh, wow, we got 2 more. Hold up, I messed it up. That was from Nihof. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Is CCP furious because US-Ukraine minerals deal? The deal means Russia, CCP, nor India cannot access those minerals. Yeah, so the important part a lot of people don't realize in the US-Ukraine minerals deal is, of course, we get access to a lot of the Ukrainian minerals, and we set up a fund that's 50-50 with US and Ukrainians. But the other part is anyone who was supporting Russia in this war, in this senseless invasion, they don't get access. They don't get any benefit from anything that happens in Ukraine after the war. And a lot of people don't realize that this is specifically targeted at countries like India, China, and Iran. They were funding the Russian economy during this war. They were buying the Russian oil, and they don't get benefit. Now, again, Europe was buying Russian gas too. I think they still buy Russian gas. So we don't exactly know how US will define the countries that are supporting the Russian war. I don't know if they will include India, because we are trying to work with India to pull them away from China, pull them away from Russia. So I don't know if they will include it, but I'm pretty certain that China will be included in this. Iran will be included in this. So they will not benefit from anything that comes out of Ukraine, any benefits. Now, that's definitely a great news, and it's also great news in a sense like the world will be less dependent on Chinese rare earths.
He knows his power is good for as long as he lives. So is that not the advantage, though, is they are playing the long 1,000-year game here?
Yeah, allocating
This is such a dumb argument that Chinese plans 1,000 years, 100 years in the future. CCP is only 75 years old, and look at how many stupid decisions they have made. First, it was Mao's Cultural Revolution, then the Great Famine, then the Tiananmen Square. It's like, this is not a party that's planning 100 years in the future. Like, people use this saying that China plans 100 years in the future while US is planning 4 years political cycle. It's just not true. If you just look at the history, you can tell that CCP is like, anytime something bad happens, their solution has been to delay the recession. In 2008, they printed so much money. In 2020, they printed so much money because they cannot afford a recession after Tiananmen Square. And right now, it seems like they're heading right into a depression.
Capital is a very serious decision and a serious undertaking. And if you're being judged in 12-week increments, right, quarterly.
Someone, Brendan, Texas, just said it great. People were saying back in the days that Hitler was planning 100 years in the future. Doesn't seem like his plans worked out.
It's awfully hard to allocate capital to large projects. In the same way, yes, it's wonderful to think that if companies are incentivized to come to this country and build factories, they'll do so. But, you know, it takes a long time to build a factory. And then you have to staff it. And then you have to get your supply chain set. I mean, that can be 2 to 3 years. So if you right now are a CFO of a large U.S. company, you're saying, OK, fine. I understand that if we move this factory back to the U.S., it would be better for us. But by the time we do so, Mr. Trump may actually be back to the private sector, right? I mean, it could take 3 to 4 years. So it's very hard to operate in that context. And yes, in that sense, China is more strategic in their decisions. They're a command economy. They are a communist party-controlled country, which is obviously not to my liking. But as far as central planning, yeah, it's more efficient.
I think we give them too much credit for this long-term view.
Right.
I really do. Like, we're like, oh, the Chinese communists are thinking really long-term. No, they're not. They're thinking about how to hold on to power right now. And if they are thinking long-term, they're not thinking about things that will make their country more prosperous. They're thinking about things that will make their country safer for communists who want to lead it. All I'm saying is on the economy, let's not give them more credit than they're due. They want to hold their grip on power, and they'll do it any way they can. Making their citizens rich, maybe. Making them really poor, probably.
By the way, you know who else likes to hold on to power? Democrats.
But hopefully that's it for today. I will try to do longer streams in the future. We want to do this daily, so you guys get daily news. But if you liked it, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe button. I think we got around 700 subs today, so definitely great. Thank you so much, everyone who joined in. If you have any feedback, just drop it in the comments down below, because like I said, this is one of the first streams I'm doing, and we don't have anyone managing the chat right now or doing some tech stuff. So if you have any questions, any feedback, just drop it below and we'll apply for the future. So we finally have a last questions. We'll answer it. Thank you so much, Mane, again for the €5. I think that's your third donation. Can European countries replace Russian oil and gas by American oil and gas? Does US have enough oil and LNG for that? Yeah, I think a lot of the European countries have replaced the Russian oil and gas. I think the only countries who haven't replaced it are the countries that don't want to replace it. I think it's Serbia, Hungary. I'm missing one more country, but there's one more country that they just see Russia as an ally, so they don't want to replace it. But a lot of the European countries have replaced it. And that's it. So it was really fun. Thank you, everyone who joined, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it.